You believe in what you see, in the solidity of the world around you, in the logic that holds your thoughts together. But what if reality isn't solid? What if your perception isn't a window, but a mirror? What if everything you call real is built on loops, illusions, and assumptions that collapse the moment you try to hold them still? In this 2+ hour descent, you'll explore 20 paradoxes, ideas so strange, they twist the fabric of your awareness. These aren't riddles or puzzles to solve. They're mental fractures designed to expose how fragile your version of reality truly is. You won't be given answers, you'll be given unmaking, thought traps, recursive spirals, shifting mirrors. So, put on your headphones, let the edges blur, and prepare to fall asleep with your mind wide open. You walk through the world as if it's stable. Trees stay trees, walls don't melt, objects don't flicker in and out of existence. You trust that what you see is there, and that your observation confirms it. Reality feels concrete, unchanging, beneath your gaze. But what if that gaze is the problem? This is the paradox of the reality that dissolved when observed. The haunting idea that what you perceive as real only becomes real because you're looking, and the moment you try to grasp it, to measure it, to define it, it changes, collapses, or vanishes entirely. The roots of this paradox run deep into quantum physics. At the subatomic level, particles do not have definite positions or velocities until they're observed. They exist in superpositions, multiple states at once. But once you look, once you measure, they choose. They collapse into one state. The observation creates the outcome. This isn't philosophy. It's been measured, repeated, proven, and it should terrify you, because it means the universe might not be a solid structure you live inside, but a shifting field of possibilities responding to attention. Your attention. The implications are staggering. It means that observation isn't passive, it's active. When you look at something, you're not just seeing it, you're changing it. You bring it into being. You define it by choosing to notice it. And just as frightening, what you don't observe, what you ignore, might never fully exist for you at all. You don't live in a universe of things. You live in a universe of interactions. And that reality, your reality, isn't independent of you. It depends on you. It emerges through you. This isn't just quantum mechanics. It echoes in consciousness studies, neuroscience, even ancient spiritual traditions. Every time you observe, you filter. Every time you name, you reduce. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. So what happens when you try to look inward? When the observer observes itself? Here, the paradox collapses into recursion. You try to pin down the you behind your eyes, the one doing the seeing, and it slips away. You're never quite where you're looking from. You find thoughts, emotions, memories, but never the observer itself. You are the loop, a reflection of a reflection. And the more you search for a fixed reality, within or without, the more it dissolves. This isn't a glitch, it's a feature. Reality was never meant to be captured. It was meant to move, to shift, to breathe. You don't live in a fixed universe. You live in a field of potential, endless until noticed. And here's the haunting part. The more certain you become, the more reality solidifies, not because it's true, but because you've stopped looking deeper. Your certainty collapses possibility. Your definitions build prisons. But what if you stopped defining? What if you allowed reality to remain fluid? What if you didn't need to collapse the wave? Would you live in confusion? Or would you live in freedom? Because maybe what we call real isn't what's stable. It's just what we've stared at long enough to stop questioning. So tonight, as you drift between sleep and waking, let the definitions fade. Let the edges blur. And know, the moment you observe something too closely, it disappears. You spend your life searching for truth about yourself, about others, about the world. You crave certainty, stability, something to stand on. Once you find it, you cling to it. It becomes your compass, your comfort, your foundation. But what if truth is fragile? What if the moment you believe in it, it begins to turn against you? This is the paradox of the truth that reversed when believed. The disturbing realization that certain truths only remain valid as long as you remain uncertain. And once you fully believe them, they begin to collapse, distort, or even become false. It sounds impossible, but you've felt it. A piece of wisdom strikes you in a moment of insight. It opens you, changes you. You see something you didn't see before. It humbles you, challenges you. You think, this is true, but days pass, then years. That same truth, once liberating, becomes rigid, absolute. You stop questioning it. You stop seeing it as one lens among many and start treating it as the lens you wear it constantly, and slowly it begins to blind you. Truth becomes dogma, certainty becomes control, and the very thing that set you free begins to limit you. This happens in every domain. A religious teaching brings comfort, but clung to without doubt, it becomes a weapon. A psychological insight reveals a pattern, but overused, it reduces people to stereotypes. A scientific principle explains the world, but held too tightly, it blocks new theories. A political belief empowers the oppressed, but if turned into identity, it silences dissent. Truth, when fully believed, often stops evolving. And here's why. Belief ends inquiry. Once you believe something is true, your mind begins filtering reality to support it. You accept confirming evidence and reject contradiction. You feel good when others agree and defensive when they don't. You stop noticing what doesn't fit your narrative. Your truth becomes a loop, and loops, by nature, exclude what lies outside them. But paradoxically, the most powerful truths are those that refuse to be locked down. They breathe, they shift, they evolve as you do. They don't demand belief, they demand relationship. You don't hold them, you dance with them. The moment you say, this is absolutely true, the dance ends, and the reversal begins. What once opened your mind now narrows it. What once made you feel alive now makes you rigid, tribal, afraid of being wrong. And this is what terrifies the ego most. The idea that truth is not a possession, but a process. Because if truth can reverse, then what can you trust? Here's the deeper answer. Not truth itself, but your capacity to navigate it, to question, to unbelieve, to return again and again to the unknown. This is not weakness. It's not relativism. It's not saying all truths are equal. It's saying all truths are fragile, and in their fragility lies their beauty. Even ancient wisdom understood this. In Zen, the master gives a student a teaching, only to later tell them to abandon it. In mysticism, enlightenment often begins with unlearning. In science, every law is provisional until it breaks. So what now? Do you stop believing in anything? No. You believe lightly. You hold truth in open hands. not clenched fists. You ask, is this still alive in me? Is it still serving me? Am I using it? Or is it using me? Because sometimes the truest thing you can do is let go of what was once true, not because it was false, but because you've outgrown it. So beware of any belief that tells you it's final, because the moment you stop questioning, the truth starts lying. You believe your mind is your sanctuary, your private space, your tool for solving problems, your place of refuge from the chaos of the world. You think your thoughts are yours, your ideas born from within, your judgments shaped by your experience. But what if your mind isn't your sanctuary? What if it's your prison? This is the paradox of the mind that projected its own jail. The disquieting truth that your own thinking patterns, shaped by fear, culture, memory, and expectation, often create the very limitations you believe you're trapped in. Not because the world is truly that small, but because your mind made it so. From a young age, the mind begins to construct stories to keep you safe. Don't speak up. It's dangerous. Don't try. You'll fail. Don't trust. You'll get hurt. These aren't abstract beliefs. They're neurological patterns, grooves etched into the brain by repetition, trauma, and reinforced experience. And slowly, the mind builds walls. Invisible ones. You move through life as if you're free, but you're moving through a map drawn, long ago, by a frightened version of yourself, a version who mistook safety for truth, a version who began mistaking thoughts for facts. The real paradox: the key to the jail was never taken from you. It was never locked. You built the bars, you chose the limits, and you kept reinforcing them with each passing thought. The human brain has what psychologists call a negativity bias. It clings to threat. It remembers rejection longer than praise. It scans for danger even when there is none. This bias once helped us survive, but now it builds cages out of stories. I'm not good enough. They won't understand me. I always mess up. This is just how I am. Thoughts like these aren't harmless. They shape perception. If you believe the world is against you, you'll only see betrayal. If you believe you're broken, you'll ignore evidence of your healing. If you believe you don't deserve joy, you'll sabotage anything that offers it. And yet, you call this prison realism. You defend your cell with words like logic, honesty, experience, not realizing those are just the paint on the walls. You don't challenge the jail because you don't see it as a jail. You see it as you. But here's the deeper twist. The mind that built the prison also holds the blueprint for escape. It has the power not just to reinforce patterns, but to rewire them. Neuroplasticity isn't a buzzword. It's a biological revolution. Your brain can learn to dismantle its own walls. But first, it has to see them. You must become aware of your inner narrative, not to silence it, but to question it. Whose voice is that? When did I first believe that? What if that isn't true anymore? And most importantly, what happens if I stop believing it, even for a moment? The shift doesn't happen all at once. The mind will resist. It will warn you. It will whisper that freedom is dangerous, that comfort is safer. But comfort isn't the same as peace. Comfort is the cell you've decorated. Peace is what waits outside the bars. You won't think your way out of the jail. You'll have to feel your way through. Act in spite of the story. Risk a new narrative. Dismantle a belief, not with violence, but with curiosity. Because the jail was never made of iron. It was made of thought, and thoughts can change. So tonight, as you lie in silence, listen to the voice inside your head. and ask, is this voice protecting me or controlling me? Is this belief a guide or a guard? What part of me might be free if I stop repeating this sentence? Because once you see the jail, you're already halfway out of it. You make choices every day. Coffee or tea, stay or leave, speak or stay silent. You weigh your options, compare outcomes, feel a sense of ownership over your decisions. This is the foundation of what it means to be human, free will. The belief that you could have chosen differently, that you are the one in control. But what if that control evaporates the moment you try to grasp it? This is the paradox of the choice that disappeared upon awareness. The strange phenomenon where the closer you examine your choices, the more they dissolve into chains of influence, conditioning, and unconscious bias. The freer you believe you are, the less you realize how little was ever actually chosen. Let's start small. Think about your preferences. Do you prefer sweet or salty? Morning or night? Safety or risk? You didn't choose these tendencies. They were shaped by genetics, environment, early experiences. They feel like you, but they arrived before you were even aware there was a self to assign them to. Now consider the big decisions. Who you love, what you believe, what you fear. Were these freely chosen, or were they sculpted over time by 1,000 invisible forces? Parents, teachers, language, trauma, media, culture. You carry their imprints in your neural pathways, their voices in your head. By the time you're old enough to choose, the options have already been filtered through a mind built by everything you didn't choose. And here's the strange part. The more aware you become of these influences, the more the illusion of free will begins to collapse. You realize your thoughts have patterns, your reactions have scripts, your decisions often follow predictable lines, decided more by previous experiences than by present freedom. Even the act of becoming aware of a pattern is part of a chain reaction you didn't initiate. The awareness itself was triggered by a book, a conversation, a dream. The moment you recognize the machinery behind the choice, it's already been made. So what's left? Are you just a puppet of your past, your biology, your culture? That's one answer. But it's not the only one. Here's where the paradox turns. The disappearance of choice upon awareness isn't the end of freedom. It's the beginning of a different kind. Because while you may not control the origin of your thoughts, you can learn to relate to them differently. You can interrupt the loop. You can observe a pattern without obeying it. You can feel a reaction rise and choose not to act on it. This isn't the freedom of absolute will, it's the freedom of the second thought. The first thought might be fear. The second thought might be, I don't have to follow that fear. The first reaction might be anger. The second could be silence, reflection, a different response. And this tiny sliver between reaction and response is where a new kind of freedom is born. A freedom not of origin, but of relation. Not I choose whatever I want, but I no longer blindly obey what I've been conditioned to want. It's subtle, it's fragile. It requires awareness without attachment, because the moment you cling to this awareness, try to control it, label it, own it, it slips away again. That's the loop. You can't hold choice too tightly. You can only witness it and step into the gap it briefly offers. So what now? You stop asking, was this choice really mine? And start asking, can I be present enough to notice the choice before it disappears again? Because real freedom doesn't come from having infinite options. It comes from recognizing the moment and responding, not from the script you were given, but from the awareness you've grown into. You move through life, as if your senses are windows, clear, objective, trustworthy. You assume what you see is there, what you hear is accurate, what you feel is real. You treat perception like a mirror reflecting the world. But what if it's not a mirror at all? What if perception doesn't reveal the world, but creates it? This is the paradox of the perception that painted the world it saw. The quiet illusion that what you experience comes from out there, when in truth it emerges from in here, from the brain's internal construction, from expectation, memory, bias, fear, desire. The world you see is not the world itself. It's the version your nervous system permits you to see. The eye takes in light, but it doesn't show you light. It shows you color, and color isn't out there. It's the brain's interpretation of wavelength. You don't see what's there. You see what your brain renders. The same is true of sound, of touch, of emotion. You don't directly access reality. You access signals, filtered through layers of biology and belief. Even time isn't perceived objectively. Your experience of an hour waiting in pain is not the same as an hour laughing with a friend. One drags, one vanishes. Yet the clock ticks at the same pace. So which is real, the measurement or the perception? This question opens a deeper crack, because if perception constructs reality, then perception also limits it. Your expectations shape what you notice. Your beliefs shape what you interpret. If you believe people are cruel, you'll notice cruelty more readily. If you think you're unworthy, every neutral glance becomes a judgment. The mind becomes a painter, and then forgets it's holding the brush. You aren't looking through a window. You're standing inside a gallery of your own design. And here's where the paradox deepens. You react to the world you think you're seeing, unaware that you helped build it. You feel anxious about rejection, not realizing your anticipation of it filters how others respond. You expect the worst, and thus miss the kindness in front of you. You believe reality is hard, and so it is for you. Your perception becomes prophecy. But here's the gift buried in the trap. If perception paints the world, then awareness can repaint it. You can't stop interpreting, but you can recognize that you're interpreting. You can say, this isn't the world, this is my lens. This isn't reality, it's my nervous system's best guess. This emotion isn't truth, it's a pattern activated by past experience, and in that realization, a space opens. You pause before judging someone. You breathe before assuming. You notice when fear is coloring the moment and decide to wait for clarity. This isn't magical thinking. It's neuroscience. The brain's default mode is prediction, not reflection. It doesn't show you what's there. It shows you what it expects to find, but you can retrain it with curiosity, with stillness, with the radical humility to admit, I might be wrong about what I'm seeing. This doesn't mean nothing is real. It means your version of real is flexible, and that flexibility is freedom. Because if perception shapes your reality, then you are never fully trapped by your circumstances. You can choose to see differently, not by force, but by letting go of the illusion that what you see is the only truth there is. So tonight, as your eyes close and the outer world fades, notice the inner one. Watch how it shifts, how time bends, how colors melt, how memory, dream, and fear blur into a landscape no one else can see. This is your mind painting again, and maybe, just maybe, it always was. You define yourself by your memories, your childhood, your triumphs, your traumas, the faces that stayed, the words that cut, the decisions that shaped who you became. You look backward to understand who you are now. Memory is identity. Without it, the self seems to vanish. But what if your memories are lying? This is the paradox of the self that remembered what never happened. The unsettling truth that memory is not a recording of the past, but a reconstruction built in the present. A story you keep retelling, with details that shift, blur, and sometimes never even existed. And yet, that false memory becomes part of you. You think memory is a vault, static, reliable, tucked away in some mental archive, but neuroscience tells a different story. Each time you remember something, your brain doesn't retrieve it like a file, it rebuilds it. Memory is a living, malleable process, susceptible to emotion, suggestion, bias, and time. The more you remember something, the more it changes. You add details that weren't there. You omit others that were. You emphasize what fits your current narrative. You forget what doesn't. This isn't deception. It's how memory works. And here's where the self gets pulled into the loop. Because if memory defines identity, but memory is unreliable, then your sense of self is built on unstable ground. You are, in many ways, a story your brain keeps editing, a fiction you mistake for autobiography. Think about a moment you're sure shaped you, a childhood injury, a betrayal, a turning point. How much of that memory is fact, and how much is feeling? How many of your beliefs about who you are, shy, brave, broken, strong, come from memories that might be incomplete, distorted, or simply false? Studies show that people can be led to vividly remember events that never happened at all, lost in a mall, attacked by an animal, even committing a crime. Given the right cues, the mind fills in the gaps, then insists it was there. That insistence becomes identity. You start acting in accordance with a story that may not be true, but feels true. And that feeling is all the brain needs to solidify the loop. You act like the version of you your memory constructed. And by acting that way, you reinforce the memory, and the self becomes a closed system, rooted in a past that might never have existed. So what now? Are you just a hallucination of accumulated fictions? Not exactly. Your memories feel real because they reflect real emotion. The facts may change, but the pain, the joy, the longing, those are anchored in the body. Memory doesn't need to be factual to be meaningful. But you have to hold it gently. You have to recognize it for what it is. Not a truth, but a story. Not a verdict, but a version. And you can write new ones. You're not locked into the memories that wounded you. You're not doomed to replay the ones that limit you. You can ask, is this memory serving me or defining me? Is this belief about myself still true or just familiar? The brain is plastic. Identity is fluid. The self is not a statue. It's a river. And sometimes, to become who you truly are, you must forget who you thought you were. You're allowed to question your origin story. You're allowed to update the narrative. You're allowed to step outside the loop and remember yourself differently. Because maybe the most powerful act of self-awareness is realizing the self was never fixed. It was remembered into being. When you look into a mirror, you expect to see the past. Light bouncing off your body, reflected back into your eyes. It's an echo, delayed by milliseconds. You expect familiarity. You expect truth. You expect to see yourself. But what if what stares back isn't just a reflection of who you are, but a prediction of who you're becoming? This is the paradox of the mirror that reflected the future, the strange phenomenon where the more you observe yourself, the more you shape yourself, and the more the reflection becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy rather than a simple record of reality. We assume a mirror is neutral, passive. But psychologically, mirrors are anything but. They're tools of construction. When you look in the mirror, you're not just seeing a face, you're seeing a concept, an identity, a role. And depending on what you expect to see, you subtly change what you become. Think about it. You look into the mirror with shame. You see flaws. You adjust. You shrink. You become more hesitant in the world. You look into the mirror with pride. You see potential. You walk taller. You take more risks. You become more yourself. The reflection is not just reactive, it's directive. And here's the twist. This doesn't just happen with physical mirrors. It happens with psychological mirrors too. How others see you, how society defines you, how culture reflects your value back at you. If you're told you're smart, you often become smarter. If you're told you're unworthy, you often live like it's true. If you're told you're broken, you begin to fracture in all the expected places. The self becomes a mirror to the mirrors it stands in front of. This is known as the looking glass. Self, a concept in sociology where your identity is shaped not by who you are, but by who you believe others think you are. You see yourself through imagined eyes, and those eyes sculpt you. But here's where the paradox truly sharpens. The more you examine yourself, the more you intervene in the outcome. Like the quantum observer who collapses the wave by looking, your self-perception alters your trajectory. You aren't just watching your future, you're writing it, one thought at a time. And often, it happens unconsciously. You try to find yourself, but the act of looking creates a self you then mistake for discovery. You stare long enough, and the person in the mirror starts staring back, demanding to be lived up to. And yet, who was that person before you looked? The mirror, once a tool of recognition, becomes a pressure to perform. It shows you not who you are, but who you think you're supposed to be. And still, you trust it. So what now? Do you stop looking? No. You look differently. You recognize that. The mirror is a stage. That self-reflection isn't about confirming what you are, but opening space for what you might be. You shift your gaze from judgment to curiosity. Instead of asking, "Is this really me?" ask, "What version of me is trying to emerge?" Because the mirror is a portal, not to the past, but to a possibility. And when you look into it with intention, not fear, not fixation, not shame, you begin to see the outlines of a future self calling to you. Not demanding, not accusing, just waiting for you to believe in it. Because once you do, the loop completes. Perception shapes identity. Identity shapes action. Action shapes reality. And reality confirms the reflection. So tonight, if you find yourself staring into a mirror, physical or internal, pause. Notice what stares back. And ask not if it's true. Ask if it's useful. Because maybe the mirror doesn't reflect the future. Maybe it invites it. You think you can watch something without changing it. That you can observe a situation, a person, even yourself, with neutrality. The belief is simple, that observation is passive, that the act of seeing leaves the scene untouched. But what if the very act of watching is never neutral? This is the paradox of the observer that changed the outcome. The profound realization that attention is not just a lens, but a force. That to observe anything, consciously or unconsciously, is to alter it. That the moment you look, the object of your gaze shifts, folds, reacts. This isn't just philosophy, it's physics. At the quantum level, particles behave differently when they are being observed. In the famous double-slit experiment, Light behaves like a wave when left alone, but the moment a measuring device watches it, it collapses into particles. Observation doesn't just report reality, it reshapes it. But this paradox isn't confined to science labs. It's alive in your everyday life. Imagine a child drawing alone. Their lines are messy, free, expressive. But the moment they notice someone watching, the energy shifts. They draw slower. They self-correct. They start performing. The drawing changes, not because of skill, but because of the presence of an observer. You do this too. You behave differently when you're being watched. You choose your words more carefully. You smile in ways you don't when alone. You adjust your tone, your posture, your silence. The gaze of another rewrites your behavior. But here's where the loop tightens. You're always observing yourself. You are the watched and the watcher. You narrate your own life in real time. How am I doing? Do I look okay? Was that stupid to say? You are the mirror and the performer, the surveillance and the suspect. You watch yourself so closely that the natural self, unguarded, intuitive, alive, starts to disappear beneath layers of self-consciousness. And the tragedy? You call this awareness. But often, it's inhibition. A mind constantly watching itself cannot move freely. It stutters, second guesses, hesitates, and yet it thinks it's gaining clarity, when in fact it's distorting the experience. Even in relationships, the observer effect plays out. You confront someone with a problem, and just by naming it, you change how they respond. You tell a story from your past, and in doing so, you rewrite its emotional texture. You talk about your pain, and it either deepens or softens, depending on the listener. Reality, especially social reality, isn't fixed. It's fluid, responsive, alive. Your attention bends it. And here's the deeper twist. You don't need to consciously observe to change something. Expectation alone is enough. If you expect someone to be unkind, your body will prepare for threat. Your tone will tighten. Your posture will harden. And they will likely respond in kind. You created the very outcome you feared by observing it before it happened. Your attention casts shadows, and sometimes those shadows look like truth. So what now? Should you stop observing? Stop reflecting? No. But you must observe with care, with the humility to know that your presence changes things, that your gaze is not neutral, that your mind, even in silence, is shaping the moment. The goal is not to stop looking. The goal is to look with lightness, to release the need to control what you see, to watch without fixing, defining, or predicting. You can observe gently. You can witness without distorting. You can let things be what they are, not what your gaze demands they become. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can offer is your attention, not as a spotlight that burns, but as a lantern that illuminates. You like to think belief follows evidence, that you see the facts, weigh the logic, and then arrive at your conclusion. That belief is the result of perception. That truth, when presented clearly enough, is impossible to deny. But what if it works the other way around? This is the paradox of the belief that erased the evidence. The disturbing truth that once a belief takes root, it doesn't just color how you interpret the evidence. It deletes what doesn't fit. It distorts memory, redirects attention, and reshapes the world until it appears to confirm what you already believe. You don't perceive to believe. You believe, and then you perceive. Cognitive scientists have studied this for decades. One experiment after another reveals the same unsettling truth. The brain doesn't passively receive information. It filters it ruthlessly. It discards contradictions and elevates affirmations. This is known as confirmation bias. You notice the article that supports your view. You dismiss the one that challenges it. You remember the insult from someone you distrust and forget the compliment. You recall the success of your favorite politician and ignore the failures. Your belief system becomes a pair of glasses you don't know you're wearing. And here's the terrifying part. The smarter you are, the better you become at defending your beliefs. Not because they're truer, but because your intelligence equips you to rationalize them more creatively. Belief becomes not a search for truth, but a fortress against change. It turns evidence into servant, not master. You don't see the world, you construct it around what you already think is true. This is how people live inside entirely different realities. Same events, same data, different interpretations. Because their belief about politics, religion, identity, even self-worth, filters what they let in. But the paradox deepens, because once you become aware of this filter, you might think you've escaped it. You haven't. Even your awareness of bias can become another belief. I'm someone who sees clearly, and that belief too begins to erase contradictions. You build a new fortress, one made of self-righteousness. Even skepticism can become a blind faith. So what now? How do you find truth in a world where belief rewrites perception? You begin by admitting, I could be wrong. Not as a performance, as a practice. You examine your beliefs, not to defend them, but to test them. You seek disconfirming evidence, not to tear yourself down, but to widen the frame. You become suspicious of certainty, especially your own. You ask, what would I have to see in order to change my mind? And then ask, would I even notice if it were right in front of me? Because the mind doesn't just look for what's there, it looks for what it expects to be there. And everything else, it forgets. This isn't just personal, it's collective. Entire cultures fall into belief traps. Entire eras of history are rewritten to fit a desired narrative. Entire ideologies live on, not because they work, but because people believe in them so strongly, they can't see what doesn't support them. Belief doesn't just erase the evidence, it erases possibility. So the way forward is not to believe in nothing, it's to believe lightly, to hold your convictions like tools, not weapons, to let go of the need to always be right, to see doubt not as weakness, but as space for growth. Because a belief that cannot survive contradiction was never a truth to begin with. So tonight, as you examine what you hold to be real, ask, what am I no longer seeing because I believe I already understand? Because maybe the mind's greatest power is not in what it believes, but in what it's willing to unbelieve. Time feels like movement. Second by second, moment by moment, life pushing forward. You live under its constant pull. You wake, eat, work, age, and eventually die, all according to the ticking of some unseen clock. It seems linear, unstoppable, indifferent. You measure your memories by it, your hopes within it. But what if time isn't moving? What if you're the one doing the moving through something that never actually changes? This is the paradox of the time that looped without moving. The eerie idea that time, as you perceive it, might be an illusion of consciousness. That past, present, and future don't happen in sequence, but all coexist. And that your experience of moving through time is just that, an experience, not a law of nature. Physics whispers this already. Einstein's theory of relativity broke the idea of universal time. Time moves differently depending on your speed, your gravity, your frame of reference. Two clocks at different altitudes tick at different rates. A person near a black hole experiences time more slowly than someone far away. There is no now that applies to all observers. The future isn't ahead. The past isn't behind. Time is not a line, it's a landscape. And you're just walking through it. But here's where it becomes psychological. You've had moments where time stretched, where seconds felt like hours, a car crash, a heartbreak, a near-death experience. And you've had moments where hours vanished, lost in music, in laughter, in awe. Time didn't change. You did. Because time, at the level of conscious experience, is not measured by clocks. It's measured by attention. The mind organizes events into a sequence, labels them as before and after, and fills in the gaps with memory and anticipation. But this sense of flow is a narrative, not a fact. It's a construction that helps you function, but not necessarily one that reflects reality. And here's the real paradox. If all moments exist, if time is a dimension, not a flow, then the past hasn't disappeared, and the future hasn't arrived. They're all still there. You just can't perceive them, yet. This is what some physicists and mystics have quietly hinted at for centuries. Time isn't passing. You are. Your consciousness is the traveler. Your awareness is the needle, sewing together still frames into motion. And just like a movie projector, your mind turns static frames into a story that feels like motion, even when nothing is truly moving. This challenges everything, because it means your sense of urgency, of running out of time, of chasing the future, of regretting the past, might be built on a misunderstanding. Time isn't something happening to you, it's something happening through you. And just like a loop, it may not be going anywhere at all. Think about your habits. How many days feel like copies of each other? How many conversations have you repeated? How many emotions do you relive like echoes? You think time is progressing, but often you're circling, not because time loops, but because you do. The external world changes, but inside, you replay old fears, recycle old desires, revisit old stories, until the loop feels like a prison. But here's the key. If time is a landscape, and you are the traveler, then you are not bound to the loop. You can pause, you can step off the path, you can witness a moment without rushing to the next one. Because freedom from time doesn't mean leaving the clock behind. It means loosening your grip on the story it tells. The past is not your anchor. The future is not your promise. There is only this moment, endlessly unfolding, endlessly available. And you are not being dragged through time. You are standing still, watching the loop return. You move through the world with a sense of who you are, a self, a stable center. You say, I am this, and expect that statement to stay true, no matter the day, the mood, or the mirror. Identity feels like the anchor beneath the chaos of life, the thing that persists while everything else changes. But what if identity is the thing that changes the most? This is the paradox of the identity that shifted each time you looked. The unsettling realization that the self you think you know doesn't actually exist as a fixed form. but as a reflection that morphs every time you observe it. You aren't uncovering a truth when you find yourself. You're generating a version that responds to the act of looking. Who you are is influenced by when and where you're asking the question. You feel confident alone, but anxious in a crowd. You feel compassionate with one person and indifferent with another. You behave like a leader in one room and a follower in the next. So who are you, really? The answer: it depends on who's asking and when. The self is contextual. Neuroscience supports this. There is no single self-center in the brain. Identity is an emergent property, constructed from memory, sensory input, emotional state, social environment, and internal narratives. What you call me is more of a story engine than a singular, stable being. And the story changes depending on who's listening. When someone sees you as wise, you speak more carefully. When someone treats you like you're broken, you feel fragile. When you remember a past version of yourself, you reinterpret that memory through your present emotions. Even self-reflection isn't immune. The more you look inward, the more the image shifts. You think you've uncovered a core truth, only to revisit it years later and find it was a phase, a defense, a mask. The moment you try to hold your identity still, it blurs, like a reflection on water touched by your own hand. This is not a flaw, it's the nature of consciousness. To be aware of yourself is to change yourself. That's the loop. You look to define yourself, but the act of definition transforms the thing being defined. You think you're discovering who you are, but you're actually participating in the creation of who you are. And yet, we fear this instability. We crave a fixed identity. I'm a good person. I'm a victim. I'm broken. I'm healing. I'm this kind of thinker, that kind of soul. Labels feel safe. Categories give comfort, but they also confine. Because the moment you say, "This is who I am," you begin rejecting what doesn't match. You ignore growth that contradicts the story. You deny complexity that muddies the waters. You cling to old identities out of habit, guilt, or pride, long after they've expired. And this is where suffering hides. Because when your identity becomes rigid, life has to either match it or break you. But if you allow your selfhood to remain in motion, everything shifts. You don't have to find yourself. You have to notice yourself. Moment by moment, situation by situation, letting the truth of now reveal its own version of you. One that's not final, but fluid. And here's the gift. You aren't less real because you change. You're more alive because you do. You are not the mask, not the mirror, not even the person beneath them. You are the space where all of it appears, then disappears, then appears again in new form. So the next time you ask, "Who am I really?" pause. Let the question echo. Don't rush to answer, because maybe the truest self is the one that never stops becoming. You've been taught that cause comes before effect. That one thing happens, and then another follows. A rock is thrown, and the window shatters. You speak, and someone listens. You act, and consequences unfold. This linear flow, cause, then effect, is how you build your understanding of time, morality, even justice. But what if that's not always true? This is the paradox of the cause that came after its effect. The reality-shifting idea that under certain conditions, the effect might appear before the cause. That the consequence might already be in motion before the action that supposedly triggered it. That time itself might not be as strict as we think. It begins in the quantum world. In strange experiments, Particles appear to decide their state after measurement, not before. In one version of the famous delayed choice experiment, a photon seems to retroactively determine its behavior based on a choice made after it has passed through a system, as if the future reached back and edited the past. Physicists argue over what this means, but the implication is unnerving. Maybe events aren't strictly bound to a forward-moving timeline. Maybe what happens can loop, twist, rewrite. But this isn't just quantum weirdness. You felt it in your life. You meet someone and feel instantly changed, as if you've known them forever. You can't explain it, but their presence rewrites something old. You look back at your life, and suddenly, a moment from the past makes sense only because of something that's just now happened. A decision you made today suddenly casts light on an old memory, making it feel like that's what it meant all along. The effect came first. The understanding, the meaning, the narrative, the cause came later. And still, it changed everything. In psychology, this shows up as postdictive reasoning, the mind rewriting the past in light of the present. Not because it's lying, but because it's always trying to make things make sense. The brain isn't a camera, it's a storyteller, and when a new event happens, it edits the story backward. Even emotions follow this loop. You feel anxious, and only later find the reason. You feel relieved, and then retroactively decide what caused it. You fall in love, and only then begin to reinterpret your past as leading up to it. Your life becomes a novel written out of order. And here's the twist. This isn't a glitch, it's how meaning is built. Meaning is not discovered in real time. It's created by weaving threads after they've been laid down. The pattern emerges backward. You assign causes not based on what happened first, but on what fits best now. So, what does this mean for your choices? It means you can't always trace your path in a straight line. It means some consequences you're experiencing now may not make sense until you've lived further into them. It means some of your most defining moments may not be caused until years after they occur. You don't always get the why before the what. Sometimes you have to live the effect and trust the cause will reveal itself later. This changes everything. It challenges the way we judge ourselves, the way we explain trauma, the way we assign blame, the way we define destiny. Because if cause can arrive late, then maybe purpose can too. Maybe the pain you carry isn't meaningless, just prematurely interpreted. Maybe the failure you endured wasn't the end, just a setup for a future you haven't reached. Maybe your life isn't unfolding in order. Maybe it never was. So what now? You stop demanding to understand everything immediately. You allow some pages to remain unresolved. You trust that what doesn't yet make sense might make sense after the next chapter. Because sometimes the cause doesn't come first. Sometimes the meaning arrives like a whisper from the future, turning the effect you've already lived into a truth you finally understand. You live in a world that feels constant. Trees sway whether you're watching or not. Traffic hums down distant roads. The stars hang in the sky, patient and unbothered by your gaze. You assume the world continues when you're not looking, existing independently of your awareness. But what if it doesn't? This is the paradox of the world that vanished. When you turned away, the eerie possibility that the world you believe in, the one outside your eyes and thoughts, may not be as persistent or objective as you think. That reality, as you know, it might only exist while you're inside it. The roots of this paradox stretch deep into both philosophy and physics. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect challenges our assumptions about existence. Until a particle is observed, it exists in a state of probability. Multiple possibilities overlapping, no single outcome decided. But the moment it's measured, it collapses into one. Not before, only then. As if the act of looking is what brings it into being. The question arises, what exists when no one is looking? It echoes in philosophy too. Bishop George Berkeley, centuries ago, asked, "To be is to be perceived." He suggested that objects only exist because they are perceived, by a mind, by God, by consciousness itself. Without observation, the tree doesn't fall in the forest. It doesn't even exist in the forest. But what does this mean for you? Every time you turn your head, you assume the rest of the room still exists, that the wall behind you remains solid, that the street outside still bustles, but all you actually experience, ever, is what enters your senses now. Everything else is assumption, memory, prediction, inference, not experience. You imagine a continuous world, but what you truly live in is a tight stream of consciousness, narrow, immediate, fleeting. The moment you look away, the moment you forget, the world beyond your awareness drops into a kind of uncertainty. It doesn't cease to exist, but it ceases to be real for you. And here's where the paradox twists. Your mind fills in the blanks so seamlessly you rarely notice. It creates a consistent world to keep you sane, but it's a world stitched together by assumption. You're not experiencing reality, you're experiencing the illusion of continuity. Even people vanish when you turn away, not literally, but psychologically. Someone you haven't spoken to in years becomes frozen in time. You remember them a certain way. They stay that way in your mind. But in truth, they've grown, changed, lived lifetimes you weren't part of. When you finally speak again, you're meeting a stranger you thought you still knew. They vanished the moment you turned away. And so did you, in their world. You live in countless minds like that, versions of you still frozen, still echoing. So what does this mean? It means reality is less like a stage and more like a spotlight. Wherever your attention shines, the scene appears. The rest of the theater fades into shadow. And because you can never see the whole stage, you'll never know what parts are real or merely implied. It doesn't mean the world isn't out there. It means your experience of it is always in here, bound to where you look, what you feel, and what you believe. So the next time you assume the world goes on without you, pause. Remember that your version of the world, the only one you've ever known, vanishes the moment you turn away. And maybe that's not a flaw in perception. Maybe that's a secret of consciousness. You weren't meant to see everything. You were meant to create a life worth looking into. And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't continue without you. It waits. Where do your thoughts come from? You might say the brain, or the subconscious, or past experiences. You might say they're responses to stimuli, what you're seeing, hearing, feeling in the moment. But no matter how you explain it, you believe thoughts arrive, that you receive them, respond to them, and maybe even direct them. But what if some thoughts don't arrive from anywhere? What if some thoughts create themselves? This is the paradox of the thought that thought itself into being. The strange recursive idea that some thoughts emerge not from logic, memory, or perception, but from thought itself. That the act of thinking can generate new thoughts that have no origin outside the very process that birthed them. You've experienced this. You think a simple thought, I should check my phone. Then another arises, Why do I feel anxious when I don't? Then, what does that say about me? Then, am I avoiding something? None of these were prompted by the outside world. They weren't reflections of a problem. They were a chain of thoughts thinking each other into existence. One gave birth to the next, not because of logic, but because of momentum. Thought, unchecked, is self-replicating. It can feed on itself, spiral into itself, and eventually forget what it was originally responding to, if anything. This is how intrusive thoughts happen. This is how anxiety builds. This is how entire identities are formed around internal narratives that never touched external reality. A single passing worry, what if I embarrass myself, isn't dangerous, but once it's thought, it becomes something. And then you think about why you thought it, what it might mean, whether it's true, whether it's a sign. Each new layer becomes evidence for the last, and suddenly, a thought that had no cause becomes the center of your experience. Thought created itself, then convinced you it was real. It's a feedback loop, a hallucination with structure, a ghost born from nothing, dressed in logic. But the paradox deepens, because if thoughts can think themselves into being, then so can entire belief systems. 1. Stray idea, maybe I'm not lovable, can lead to patterns of self-sabotage, avoidance, and shame. Over time, that belief solidifies. It seems real, but it started as a thought, just a thought. One that was never challenged, one that thought itself true. And yet, this same mechanism is what allows creativity, imagination, and insight. A poem writes itself line by line. A solution emerges from nowhere. A melody appears fully formed in your mind. These thoughts didn't reflect reality. They made something new. They looped, collided, evolved. Not because you forced them to, but because you let them. So what now? Do you silence the mind? Try to control every thought? No. That only feeds the loop. The goal is not to stop thought, it's to see it happening, to notice when thought is building on thought, not from reality, but from its own architecture. You pause, you breathe, you ask, did this thought arrive from what's happening, or from the echo chamber of my own mind? You don't attack it, you don't judge it, you just see it. And sometimes, that's enough for the loop to stop spinning. Because awareness breaks recursion, presence interrupts the phantom. Thoughts are not the enemy, but they are crafty. They pretend to be truth, when they're often just momentum. So tonight, as your mind drifts and loops and mutters in the dark, remember, not every thought deserves your attention. Not every idea is an invitation. Not every voice is a guide. Some thoughts were never yours. Some thoughts are still thinking themselves, and some only become real when you believe in them. Experience feels inseparable from observation. You believe that for something to be real, it must be felt, seen, heard, or known by someone. After all, what is a moment without a witness? A memory without a mind? A sound without an ear? But what if the deepest experiences can exist, even when no one's there to know them? This is the paradox of the experience that existed without witness. The haunting idea that some events, some states of being, some inner or outer moments might unfold without ever being perceived, remembered, or acknowledged. Yet they still are. It challenges a core assumption, that consciousness is required for meaning. You assume that a sunset needs someone to admire it, that a melody needs a listener, that a revelation is only real once spoken or written or understood. But nature doesn't pause for applause. Beauty blooms in forests unseen. Stars die in silence. Worlds collapse without a single eye to mark. They're passing, and it happens inside you too. How many thoughts have slipped past without notice? How many dreams did you forget the moment you woke? How many instincts rose and fell before you could name them? Not every experience is remembered. Not every emotion becomes a story. Not every pain is spoken aloud. But does that make it unreal? In neuroscience, we know that much of what your brain processes never enters awareness. Visual information is filtered before you ever see it. Your heart rate adjusts without permission. Emotions bubble up from places you can't access with thought. In other words, you are constantly experiencing things your conscious self never meets. These unwitnessed moments still shape you. A smell you didn't register triggers nostalgia later in the day. A face you didn't notice lingers in your dreams. A subtle disappointment you brushed aside grows into resentment. An ache you never spoke of turns into a truth you carry for decades. You live with echoes of moments you never heard. And here's the paradox within the paradox. Just because something goes unwitnessed doesn't mean it goes unfelt. The body remembers, the psyche absorbs, the world continues. Reality doesn't require validation. Still, we crave witnesses. We want someone to hear our pain, to see our joy, to acknowledge our becoming. We think, if no one sees it, did it really happen? Yes, it did. And some of the most important things in your life might be the ones that happened in silence. The moment you changed your mind but said nothing. The time you let something go without explanation. The forgiveness you gave in secret. The understanding you reached but never shared. The grief that broke you, witnessed only by the night. These moments are real, and they are yours. But here's where the paradox softens into invitation. Because if experiences can be real without being witnessed, then maybe you are real, even in your loneliest moments. Even when no one claps, even when no one answers your message, even when no one understands your choice. You are not made real by being seen. You are real before the eyes arrive, and long after they look away. So what now? You stop performing your life for validation. You stop believing the lie that worth only exists in reflection. You stop waiting for your experience to be confirmed, and you begin trusting your inner life as sacred, even if it's invisible. You are allowed to feel things no one else understands. You are allowed to evolve without permission. You are allowed to be moved by a moment you never speak of again. Because some of the most profound experiences were never meant to be witnessed, only lived. You usually think of dreams as places you go. At night, your mind drifts away into a world that isn't real, full of symbols, emotions, fragments of memory. Dreams are considered the opposite of waking life. Fiction, not fact. You wake up and leave them behind. You return to reality. But what if it's the other way around? This is the paradox of the dream that woke up in you. The disorienting idea that a dream is not something you enter, but something that enters you. That rather than disappearing at dawn, some dreams awaken inside your waking life and begin living through you. A dream doesn't just vanish when you open your eyes. It lingers. It colors your mood, shapes your thoughts, shifts your choices. Sometimes you carry a dream with you for days, a face, a feeling, a haunting message. And even though you know it wasn't real, it changes how you move. So what is real? A memory of something that didn't happen, but reshapes what does. A story your mind told itself while you slept, and now it's inside your bloodstream. an image you can't explain, but now you see it everywhere. You didn't wake up from that dream. It woke up in you. And here's the deeper paradox. Some dreams aren't even yours. You inherit them from family, from culture, from collective memory. You chase success because someone dreamt it for you. You seek love shaped by fairy tales you never questioned. You fear failure because you were taught to fear disappointment, not by experience, but by inherited anxiety. These are not your dreams, but they live in you. And the most dangerous ones are the ones you mistake for waking life. You work a job, raise a family, build a reputation, not realizing you're following a script written by someone else's sleeping mind. Society dreams through its citizens. Parents dream through their children. Religion, nationalism, and media all plant dream seeds in the soil of your unconscious. And then, one day, you wake up with a question. Whose life is this? Whose dream am I living? And maybe the answer is not yours, but here's the twist. Just as a dream can wake up inside you, so can you wake up inside the dream. You realize it's not fixed. It's not fate. It's not truth. It's just a version, a narrative, a projection. You're not trapped in it. You're inside it. And that means you can shape it. Lucid dreaming happens when the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming. And in life, lucidity begins when you realize your beliefs, roles, desires, they're not absolute, they're flexible, they're dream matter. This doesn't make them meaningless, it makes them malleable. Because once you know you're dreaming, you can start asking new questions. Not just, what should I do? But what story do I want to wake into? Not, how do I get through the day? But whose vision am I enacting with each step I take? And sometimes, the most radical act is not to pursue a dream, but to let one go. To let the dream of perfection die. To release the dream of pleasing everyone. To wake up from the illusion of control, of destiny, of a singular identity. Because in doing so, you don't lose yourself. You find the dream that belongs to you. So tonight, as your body sinks into sleep, ask yourself, what dreams have you been carrying that were never truly yours? Which ones have overstayed their welcome? And which ones, quiet, trembling, half-formed, are waiting for you to believe in them? Because maybe you don't dream to escape reality. Maybe you dream so one day you can return to it fully awake. You think you remember moments, a birthday, a first kiss, the last words someone said. You believe that memory is a way of returning, of revisiting something exactly as it happened. You close your eyes and the past comes alive. You're there again. You feel it. It seems real. But what if what you remember isn't the moment itself? Only the last time you remembered it. This is the paradox of the memory that replaced the moment. The unsettling truth that each time you recall an experience, you don't retrieve a fixed record, you recreate it. And in that recreation, you subtly rewrite it, until eventually your memory becomes less about what happened, and more about what you've told yourself happened. Your brain doesn't work like a hard drive. Memory isn't stored in neat little files you can open and close. Instead, remembering is an act of reconstruction. Your mind assembles fragments, sensory impressions, emotions, language, belief, into a working version of the past. But every time you access that memory, you alter it. A detail changes, a feeling intensifies. A face becomes sharper or fades, the story tightens. And the next time you remember it, you're remembering the edited version. not the original, the memory becomes more polished and less accurate. This is known as memory reconsolidation. Each act of remembering is also an act of rewriting. You don't notice it happening, but slowly, the moment you're so sure about is being replaced by memory itself. And here's where the paradox deepens. Because those rewritten memories don't just affect how you think about the past, they change how you feel in the present. They shape your identity, your relationships, your sense of justice, regret, or longing. A kind word once spoken becomes a lifeline you cling to. A glance taken the wrong way becomes the seed of a lifelong insecurity. An argument is remembered as betrayal, not because it was, but because it grew that way in the soil of repeated reflection. You begin to live inside a museum of your own curations, paintings of moments that once were raw, now filtered by mood, story, and time. And then, you defend those memories. You say, I was there, I remember. But memory isn't a courtroom witness. It's a novelist with a deadline. Even worse, the more emotional the memory, the more likely it is to be distorted. Trauma, in particular, fractures memory. Some pieces go missing, others become magnified. Meaning rushes in to fill the gaps, and that meaning becomes indistinguishable from fact. So what does this mean for you? It means some of the pain you carry might not be from the original event, but from the version you've remembered again and again. It means some of your nostalgia might be for a past that never quite existed that way. It means your present self is built on layers of memory that may have replaced the very moments they were meant to preserve. But don't despair. This isn't a glitch. It's a feature. Memory isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be adaptive. You don't remember for accuracy. You remember to survive, to learn, to evolve. If your memory reshaped something, maybe it was protecting you, or teaching you, or nudging you to grow. Still, there's power in knowing the difference. You can begin to question your stories. You can ask, is this what happened, or just what I've repeated? You can open space between memory and identity, because you are not your past. You are not even your memory of the past. You are the one who remembers, and can remember differently. So tonight, as you reflect on who you've been and what you've lived through, pause. Hold your memories gently. Let them breathe. Let them blur. Because some of the moments you remember most clearly never happened the way you think they did. You're taught to trust logic. It's the foundation of science, philosophy, mathematics. The tool that separates order from chaos. Logic promises clarity, consistency, safety. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. With logic, the world is supposed to make sense. But what happens when logic leads you somewhere it can't explain? This is the paradox of the logic that broke under its own weight. The unnerving realization that when logic is pushed to its furthest limits, it doesn't always deliver answers. Sometimes it generates contradictions. Sometimes it dissolves into absurdity. And sometimes it proves that it can't prove everything. It begins with the simplest questions. Take the classic liar's paradox. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It loops, breaks, folds in on itself. It's not a trick. It's a structural flaw in the very fabric of binary logic. In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theorems shattered the dream of a perfectly complete, self-contained logical system. Gödel proved that in any system complex enough to include arithmetic, there are statements that are true, but cannot be proven using the system's own rules. In other words, logic has limits. And once you know that, the entire framework begins to shake. You realize that not everything you feel can be expressed logically. Not everything you value can be defended rationally. Not every contradiction can be eliminated. Some must simply be lived. But here's where the paradox gets personal. Because we use logic not just to understand the world, but to defend ourselves from it. You build a belief system. You connect the dots. You use logic to explain your pain, justify your choices, predict your future. But if one piece falters, if one premise cracks, the whole structure can collapse. So you tighten your grip. You refuse to question. You worship consistency. But life isn't consistent. It contradicts. It surprises. It breaks your rules without apology. And when it does, logic can become brittle, more like armor than insight. You say, "This shouldn't have happened." You say, "I did everything right." You say, "It doesn't make sense." But logic doesn't guarantee fairness, or justice, or peace. It only guarantees that if your assumptions are correct, your conclusions might be valid. And what if your assumptions are emotional, cultural, inherited? Then the logic built on top of them becomes a beautifully constructed house on sand. This doesn't mean logic is useless. It means logic is humble. It works best when it knows where it ends, like a map that guides you, but can't tell you what the mountain feels like a compass that points north, but not why you're traveling. Logic is a tool, but it is not the terrain. And here's the deepest twist. Sometimes logic leads you to places your heart can't follow. It tells you someone doesn't love you when their silence already proved it. It tells you to give up when something deeper whispers try again. It tells you what's rational, but not what's true for you. You begin to realize some truths live outside of logic. A sunset doesn't need a syllogism. Grief doesn't follow reason. A kiss, a poem, a moment of awe, they all break the frame. And that's not a failure. That's a reminder that you are not a machine. You are a mystery, learning to navigate other mysteries. And logic is only one light on a map far bigger than it can ever fully contain. So tonight, if you find yourself thinking in circles, desperate for certainty, trying to reason your way through something that feels impossible, pause. Ask not just, what's the logical answer, but what's the truth beneath the logic? Because sometimes the mind folds, and in the silence that follows, you begin to hear what logic could never say. You ask questions to find answers. That's the whole point, isn't it? A question is a key. An answer, the lock it opens. The moment of relief, of clarity, of resolution. The question fades. The answer remains. That's how knowledge works. That's how we grow. But what if some questions don't resolve? What if the very act of asking dismantles the answer it reveals? This is the paradox of the question that undid the answer. The unsettling realization that some questions don't lead to clarity, but to collapse. That the deeper you inquire, the more unstable your answers become, until eventually, the question doesn't just challenge the answer, it erases it. You felt this in philosophy, in faith, in love, in self-inquiry. You ask, who am I? And every answer you give, your name, your role, your story, feels incomplete. So you ask again and again. And the more you answer, the less certain you become that the you you're trying to define even exists as a fixed thing. The question doesn't bring truth. It exposes the fragility of the truth you thought you had. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. In Zen, this is called a koan, a question meant not to be answered, but to be lived. What is your face before your parents were born? Try to answer it with logic, and you'll fail. Sit with it long enough, and the question changes you. Not because it gives clarity, but because it burns away illusion. In science too, the most powerful breakthroughs often come not from answers, but from better questions. Every time we thought we had it figured out, Earth as center, Newton as gospel, time as absolute, someone asked a question that made the old answer disappear. And what followed wasn't certainty. It was disorientation, then wonder, because the deepest questions don't end with punctuation. They end with expansion. Why am I here? What is consciousness? Is the universe infinite? Do I have free will? These aren't questions with tidy resolutions. They are doors you open, only to find corridors of more doors, and somewhere along the way, you stop looking for the room with the final answer. You start to see the question itself as the destination. But here's where the paradox stings. We still crave answers. We want solid ground, even when we know the question is bigger than the frame we're trying to fit it into. We keep trying to contain it. We say, love is this, God is that, I am this kind of person. And then something happens, a loss, a betrayal, a moment of silence, and the answer shatters. Not because it was wrong, but because it was small, because the question grew and the answer couldn't follow. So what now? Do you stop asking? No. You ask with reverence, not conquest. You let your questions stretch you instead of close you. You let them soften the hard walls of certainty. You learn to live in the space between curiosity and surrender. You stop demanding that every question delivers a conclusion, and you begin to trust that some questions exist to keep you awake. Because the point of these questions isn't to end the search. It's to deepen the gaze, to unmake you, so something more spacious can emerge. So tonight, if you find yourself caught in a loop, asking why me, or what's the point, or what happens next, don't rush to fill the silence. Let the question echo. Let it hollow out space inside you, because sometimes the answer isn't found. Sometimes it's felt as the absence that points to a larger presence. And maybe that's the gift. A question so powerful, it undoes the very answer that once made you feel safe. You wake up each day with a familiar sense of being you. You have a name, a past, a face in the mirror. You carry your memories like a map, your preferences like a wardrobe. Everything you experience, every sound, sight, feeling, filters through this quiet constant. I am here. But what if you're not? This is the paradox of the you that was never here. The disorienting idea that the self you feel so intimately, the you defend, improve, suffer for, might not actually exist in the way you think it does. That you may be a convincing illusion. So convincing, in fact, that even questioning it feels like losing something real. But let's begin with what we can observe. Where is this you located? Is it in your brain? Your heart? Behind your eyes? When neuroscientists go looking, they find processes, memories firing, signals passing, regions activating. But there is no single seat of self, no central observer, no tiny homunculus watching from a control room. The self, it turns out, is distributed. And worse, it's constructed. Constructed from thoughts, stories, images, roles, reactions. You're not born with a solid identity. You assemble it over time, out of culture, family, trauma, aspiration, imitation, like a collage, constantly edited, and yet it feels so whole, so real. Because the mind's job is to make the world coherent, including your place in it. The self becomes the narrator, the protagonist, the reference point. You don't just live, you live as someone. But what happens when you try to find that someone directly? You close your eyes, you search inward, you find thoughts, emotions, sensations, you find memory, desire, fear. But do you ever find the you behind them? Or do you just find more content? Like peeling, layers of an onion, always expecting to reach the center, only to discover there's nothing there but more layers. And maybe that was the point all along. There was no core, just experience. But here's where the paradox deepens. Because if there's no fixed you, then who's reading these words? Who's asking the questions? Who's witnessing the absence? That's the twist. There is awareness, there is presence, but it isn't personal, it isn't fixed, it's open, it's fluid. The you identify with is just a pattern passing through that awareness. A wave, not the ocean. And yet, you cling to it. You defend your identity. You fear death. You compare. You strive. All based on this assumption: I am someone. And that someone is here, constant, solid, important. But if you've never truly been here in the way you thought, what are you protecting? What are you afraid to lose? Because maybe the self isn't a thing to hold on to. Maybe it's the space through which life flows, a dancer made of movement, a flame made of burning, a self made of change. And when you stop trying to locate yourself, when you stop trying to define who you are, you don't disappear. You expand. You stop being a fixed point and start being the whole field. You stop being the character and start being the screen. You stop being the voice in your head and start being the silence that holds it. So what now? You don't destroy the self. You soften it. You use identity as a tool, not a cage. You hold the you lightly, knowing it's not the truth, but a useful fiction. Because once you realize you were never truly here as a fixed self, you become more present than ever. Not as an idea, but as awareness itself. So tonight, let the question settle. Who are you without the story? And listen, because in the silence that follows, you might finally feel the part of you that was always here, but never who you thought. You've wandered through 20 paradoxes, 20 loops in logic, perception, memory, and time. Each one promised to reveal something, and instead unraveled the thread you were holding. You didn't find solid ground. You found shifting floors, mirrored halls, recursive questions, and illusions wearing the mask of truth. And yet, you're still here. Not as the same self who began, but as someone a little less certain, and maybe a little more free. Because the paradox wasn't just in the words, it was in you, in the way your mind tried to hold on to meaning, then loosened, in the way the questions echoed louder than the answers, in the way your awareness kept moving beneath it all, untouched. You were never meant to solve these paradoxes. You were meant to live them, to feel the crack in the surface of certainty and let the light pour through. There's something humbling in knowing your thoughts might be illusions. There's something powerful in realizing your identity is fluid. And there's something sacred in not knowing what reality really is. Because if nothing is fixed, then everything is possible. So sleep now, not as someone desperate for closure, but as a traveler who's finally made peace with the open road. Let go of the need to understand. Let go of the need to be understood. You are not here to reach a final answer. You are here to be changed by the asking. Good night, seeker. You were never lost. You were just beginning to notice the dream that thought itself into being and called itself you.